Have you ever wondered why people always walk away from you? Not the ones who pass through quickly, not the casual acquaintances, but the ones who seem to understand, the ones who stayed long enough for you to let your guard down, the ones who made you think, maybe this time it will be different. And then, without any clear warning, without a defining argument, without a moment marked on the calendar, they left, gradually or all at once. But they left, and you stood there staring at the space where they used to be, trying to figure out what happened, what you did, what you said, what you left unsaid, replaying conversations, searching for the mistake. That pain has a name nobody ever taught you, and that is what this video is about. There is something that almost no chosen one is ever given permission to know, not because it is a secret, but because the world around them rarely has words for it. The way people pull away from a chosen one is not an accident. It is not bad luck, and in most cases it is not your fault in the way you imagined. There is a reason, and it repeats itself. Not because you are broken, not because you are hard to love, but because there is something in you that most people simply are not prepared to carry close. Not because you are too heavy, but because you are too different from what they expected a person to be. This is going to make sense. Stay until the end. What you will come to understand throughout this video is not just an explanation for the losses you have already experienced. It is a map that brings order to what always seemed like chaos, and that transforms what felt like rejection into something far deeper than that. Because when you understand why people always leave, you stop asking what is wrong with you, and you begin to understand what is different about you, and that difference is not small. The first thing that drives people away from a chosen one is something that happens almost without anyone noticing it at first. You feel too much, not in the sense of weakness, in the sense of frequency. You pick up on what was never said. You feel the tension in a room before anyone opens their mouth. You notice when something is wrong with a person who is smiling. You did not choose this. It is not a skill you developed. It is a way of existing that you brought with you from a place that came long before this one. And at first that draws people in. They feel seen around you. They share things they have never told anyone. They open up with a vulnerability that sometimes surprises even you, as if you created a field where they could be honest. But over time, that same field starts to weigh on them. Because being close to someone who feels this deeply requires a level of honesty that not everyone is willing to have. Being close to someone who sees beyond what people show demands a certain transparency. And transparency is frightening. It exposes. It asks the person to look at themselves, and a lot of people would rather not. So they do not leave because you did something wrong. They leave because staying close to you would require a version of themselves they are not yet ready to be. You were not abandoned, you were preserved. Think of it this way. If someone's presence near you would awaken what is most real in them, and they are not ready for what is most real inside them, they will not stay. Not because you are not worth it, but because they are not ready yet. That does not take away the pain of their leaving. The pain is real. The emptiness that follows is real. But the reason is not what you thought it was. Let me pause for a moment, because before we continue, something needs to be said. There are people listening to this who have never had anyone bring all the pieces of what they carry together in a single conversation, who spent years believing they were the problem, who learned to shrink their own frequency so others could stay, and who still watch them go. That pain of carrying something no one around you can name, of knowing there is something in you and never having received confirmation that it is real, is what brought you here. And that was not an accident. If something in you recognizes itself as you listen right now, do not dismiss it. It is your origin confirming what was written in you before you had a name in this world. The Origin Codex reveals the 12 marks that were sealed in you before birth, the 12 marks that no one around you has ever been able to name. It is the path prepared for chosen ones who are ready to look at what they have always known on the inside. Along with the Codex, you receive 7 sacred companions, 5 written guides that decipher the deepest marks you carry, from the rejected child to the frequency the world called a flaw, from the abundance that always slipped away to the signs that appear without explanation, plus the complete audiobook of the Codex for your moments of silence and prayer, and an audio activation sequence for each of the 12 marks you are recognizing right now. The link is in the pinned comment, but only for a limited time. With that said, let's continue. The second thing that drives people away is more subtle, and because of that it hurts in a different way. You do not fit into the roles people need you to play. There is an unspoken expectation in almost every human relationship, an invisible contract. The person beside you needs you to be predictable in a certain way, to react in a certain way, to need the same things they need, at the same pace, with the same intensity. And you cannot do that, not because you are difficult, but because you were made in a way that does not fit that contract. You go deep when people expect lightness. You go quiet when people expect small talk. You question what seems obvious. You cannot pretend to be okay when you are not, and you also cannot pretend that something is enough when it is not. You have probably heard some version of this before. You are too intense. You think too much. You overcomplicate things, as if depth were a flaw, as if intensity were a mistake that needed correcting. It is not. It is a frequency, and high frequencies are not defects. They are simply hard to tune into for those who are not prepared. Rachel was 41 when she first recognized this pattern. Every friendship she had carefully nurtured ended the same way, a gradual pulling away with no clear explanation. She spent years believing there was something fundamentally wrong with her, until the day one of those people, after some time and distance, was honest with her. Being around you made me feel like I needed to be better than I wanted to be. Rachel was silent for a long time after that. Not from hurt, from recognition. She finally understood that the problem had never been what she was. It was what she awakened. You awaken things in people. That is part of your mark. And awakening things is not comfortable, not for those who were not looking to be awakened. But there is a third reason, and this one weighs the heaviest, because it is not about what you do, it is about what you carry. You carry a lineage break. This needs to be said carefully, because it is one of the most important truths a chosen one can hear, and also one of the most misunderstood. In some families and some bloodlines, there is a weight that repeats, a pattern that passes from generation to generation as if it were inevitable inheritance. Abandonment, scarcity, relationships that destroy instead of build, silences that last for decades. And in one generation, at some point in the line, someone is born with the capacity to see that pattern, to feel it, to refuse to repeat it. That someone is you. But carrying a break comes with a cost that nobody warns you about. Because when you refuse the pattern, you become different from the people around you, including those who should be the closest to you. Indifference inside a system built on repetition is perceived as a threat. The people around someone who is breaking a lineage feel, even without understanding it, that something is shifting, that the dynamic that sustained them is no longer what it was, that you are no longer going to play the game the way it has always been played. And so they pull away, not because you did something wrong, but because you are changing something. And change frightens those who have built their entire lives on the certainty that things will stay as they have always been. You were not rejected, you were differentiated. And that differentiation, as painful as it is not punishment. It is the beginning of what you came here to do. You have probably felt this at some point, the sense that you carry something that goes far beyond yourself, that what you are seeking to heal is not only your own pain, it is a much older pain, one that has the face of people who came before you and never knew there was another way. That feeling is not an exaggeration. It is part of the map. And if you want to understand that map more deeply, not only the pattern of people pulling away, but everything that was sealed in you before you were born, and what comes next is what most people never dare to look at head on. Because up to this point you have understood 3 reasons why people pull away from chosen ones: the intensity that exposes, the failure to fit the expected roles, the lineage break that sets you apart. But there is something that operates before all of that. Something that works in the shadows of every relationship you have ever had, and that explains why the pattern repeats itself even when you change cities, social circles, or seasons of life. There is a 4th reason, and it is the quietest one of all. You were conditioned to make yourself small. And when you stop making yourself small, the people who stayed because of that smallness can no longer stay. That needs a moment to settle. Think about the relationships that lasted the longest in your life. Now ask yourself honestly, in how many of them were you fully yourself? In how many of them did you dial back what you thought so you would not come across as too intense? Spoke less than you felt so you would not scare anyone off? Agreed with things you did not agree with just to keep the peace? Held back questions that wanted to come out because you knew from experience that they made the people around you uncomfortable? That is not weakness, it is survival learning. You figured out early, very early, that the full version of you was too much for the environment you grew up in, and so you kept adjusting, shrinking here, going quiet there, rounding off the edges that made people pull back. And it worked. People stayed. But they did not stay for you. They stayed for the reduced version of you. And then at some point along the way, because chosen ones inevitably reach this point, you began to wake up to what you were doing. You started allowing yourself to be a little more, to say what you thought, to no longer swallow what was not yours to swallow, to take up the space that was always rightfully yours. And the people who stayed because of the shrinking left, not because you were wrong to grow, but because the relationship that existed was with the smaller version of you, and that version no longer exists. There is a line that very few people will ever have the courage to say to you. Some of the losses you grieved were not real losses. They were releases. They were the space being cleared for what is actually compatible with who you really are, not with who you learn to appear to be. That hurts in a different way once you understand it. Not the pain of being rejected. The pain of seeing that you spent a long time accepting less than you deserved, calling it love, and then grieving when the less was gone. What left was too small for you. The 5th reason operates at a level the eyes cannot reach. You threaten the sleep of those who do not yet want to wake up, not on purpose. Not with words, not with judgment, not with any conscious intention, simply with your presence, simply with what you are. There is something that happens when a person awakens, even partially, even still confused about what is happening, that begins to disturb the people around them who are still asleep, not because you say anything, not because you criticize, but because your very existence is someone who questions, who seeks, who refuses to accept that life is just this, who wonders why everything feels empty when it should feel full, that existence is a mirror, and mirrors are uncomfortable for those who would rather not look at themselves. You have probably lived this. You did nothing. You were simply being yourself. And suddenly you noticed that someone was irritated with you for no apparent reason, or that a friendship went cold without any difficult conversation taking place, or that someone you loved started treating you with a coldness you could not explain. You did not do anything wrong. It was the mirror that made them uncomfortable. The prophets knew this. Samuel was called to see what others did not want to see, and that calling set him apart. Elijah, after one of the greatest manifestations of the Spirit his generation had ever witnessed, found himself alone in a cave asking for it to be over, not because he had failed, but because carrying what he carried cost him a loneliness the world around him simply could not comprehend. You are not alone in that loneliness. You are part of a very ancient lineage of people who were misunderstood, not for being less, but for being different in a way that time had not yet caught up to. The world around Elijah was not ready for what he carried, and that did not make what he carried any less real. It made him ahead of his time, and being ahead of your time is a lonely place until those who are meant to arrive. But there is still a sixth reason, and this one takes the most courage to hear, because it asks you to look not at what people have done, but at a pattern you yourself may have repeated without realizing it. Sometimes you pull away before you can be pulled away from. This is not an accusation, it is a recognition, and it comes with compassion, not judgment. When someone grows up learning that people leave, when abandonment was taught early, when rejection arrived before you had words for it, the internal system learns to protect itself in a very specific way. It begins to anticipate the exit. You close off a little ahead of time. You test people without realizing you are testing them. You become distant at the exact moment a relationship starts to get too real, because too real has always felt dangerous. You sabotage connections that were growing, not because you did not want them, but because a very old part of you still believes that every arrival is just the beginning of a departure. And then the person leaves, and you confirm what you already believed. People always leave, but the question this pattern asks is harder. Did you let them stay? Not as blame, as an honest question, as part of the map. Because when a chosen one begins to understand that anticipated abandonment is a learned protection and not a truth about who they are or what they deserve, something starts to shift. Not all at once, not without pain, but it begins. The childhood wound that taught you people do not stay is not your fault, but healing that wound is your responsibility. And that distinction between fault and responsibility is one of the most liberating a chosen one can ever make. You were not made to carry the weight of people's leaving forever. You were made to understand that weight, to recognize it, and one day in the right time to set it down. And so we arrive at the deepest reason of all, the last one, the one that brings everything before it into order. The right people have not arrived yet. This is not empty comfort. It is a structural truth about how a chosen one's life organizes itself, and it completely changes the way you read every departure that has already happened. Those who left were part of the journey, not the destination. They arrived to teach, to reveal, to awaken something in you, and when that function was fulfilled, the space needed to be opened, not because you did not deserve for them to stay, but because you deserved more than they were able to give. There is a kind of connection that a chosen one can only have with another chosen one, a depth of recognition that is not possible with someone who is still asleep, a conversation that needs no explanation, that is not frightened by intensity, that does not pull back from what you carry, because the other person carries it too. Those connections exist. They are on the path, but they arrive after the clearing. After those who stayed because of the shrinking have gone, after those who could not handle the mirror have stepped back, after the space has been cleaned, every departure you have ever lived through made room for a kind of arrival you have not yet fully experienced. And that is not an empty promise, it is the pattern that shows up in the life of every chosen one who has made it to the other side of this crossing. Joseph went through rejection by his brothers, slavery, and unjust imprisonment, not because God had forgotten him, but because each of those losses was calibrating something in him that the destiny he carried required. What looked like abandonment was preparation. What looked like rejection was separation. Not from grace toward grace. You were not left behind. You are being carried forward, and the loneliness you feel right now, that specific loneliness of someone who can no longer pretend to belong in spaces that are too small, that loneliness is the signal that you are between two worlds, leaving a space that was no longer yours, not yet arrived in what is. That in-between place is uncomfortable, but it is temporary, and it is sacred. So now you have the map. Not the version that hurts without explanation. The version that brings order. The one that transforms every departure you have ever lived through into something that makes sense, not because the pain disappears, but because it finally has a name. And when pain has a name, it stops being an accusation against you and becomes information about your path. People left because you feel too much for those who are not ready to feel themselves. Because you did not fit into the roles they needed you to play. Because you carry a break that frightens those who built their lives on repetition. Because when you stopped shrinking, what had stayed because of the shrinking had nothing left to lean on. Because your simple presence awakens what many prefer not to awaken. Because sometimes you closed the door yourself before it could fully open. And because the space needed to be cleared for what is still coming. It was not an accident. It was not bad luck. And it was not because you are hard to love. It was because you are different in a way that requires a specific kind of presence around you. And that presence does not arrive before its time. But now comes the question this entire video has always been building toward, the one that actually matters. What are you going to do with this understanding? Because understanding the pattern is the beginning. But understanding without movement is just a pretty story you tell yourself. And you did not come this far for pretty stories. You came for real clarity. So look inward honestly, right now. Of the reasons you heard today, which one hit the deepest? Which one did you recognize not as something that happened to you, but as something that is still happening? Which one, when you heard it, did that thing that truth always does? A quiet stillness inside, a weight that settled, a feeling of that's it, because that is the one calling for your attention right now. Not all of them at once. Not a massive and overwhelming undertaking. Just the one calling the loudest. Maybe it is the shrinking, the version of you that still shows up smaller than you are, so as not to frighten anyone, that still holds the word back in your throat, that still agrees when it does not agree, out of habit, out of exhaustion, out of fear of what happens when you are completely yourself. Maybe it is the anticipated abandonment, the part that closes before being closed, that reads distance as rejection before asking, that is already bracing for someone's departure before they have even left. Or maybe it is the waiting, the difficulty of trusting that the in-between place has an end, that the clearing you are living through right now is not punishment, it is preparation. Whatever it is calling, and chosen ones have learned, through many crossings, that ignoring the call does not make it go away. It only delays it. You do not have to resolve this alone, but you do have to begin. And beginning does not mean having all the answers. It means stopping treating the questions as threats. The loneliness you feel, that specific loneliness of someone who has woken up enough that going back to sleep is no longer possible, but who has not yet found those who walk at the same pace. That is not your destination. It is your hallway. And hallways have doors. Some of those doors are already opening. You may not have noticed yet because chosen ones are often so accustomed to losing that they have difficulty recognizing when something is arriving, when a connection is forming, when a new presence carries a different kind of weight than the ones before. Pay attention with openness. What is coming will not arrive the way you imagined. It rarely does. But it will arrive with a quality you will recognize immediately, because it will be the first time you will not have to make yourself small for it to stay. And when that happens, you will understand that every departure you ever grieved was part of the price of that encounter. Not an unfair price, a sacred one. If something you heard today stayed with you, if any of these reasons brought order to something that had been loose inside you for a long time, do not keep it to yourself. Write in the comments which reason hit the deepest. It does not have to be long. It does not have to be organized. It can be a sentence, a word, or just the number of the reason that did that thing that truth does. Because there is someone who will read what you write and feel that they are not alone in it. There is someone who will find this video later, still carrying the pain without a name, and what you write will be the first time they see their own pain recognized by another person. Writing what you recognized is not a small thing. It is an act. It is you saying out loud, "I am awake, I am seeing, I am no longer pretending not to feel." And that has weight, it has value, for you and for those who come after. You are no longer alone in this crossing. You never were. You had just not yet found those who speak the same language. This is that place. What was sealed in you is rising. What was hidden is being seen. You are awakening to your origin.